Good afternoon. It's January 15th, 2013. I welcome all of you to the Sioux Falls City Council informational meeting here at Carnegie Town Hall. Those of you that are here, thank you for being here, and those of you that are watching live on CityLink and on SiouxFalls.org, I welcome you. I think today is one of those days when we're reminded in Sioux Falls that the city charter sets Sioux Falls City Council members as part-time people, and you'll see that many of us have other obligations professionally with our real jobs, and so you'll see that we do have a quorum, but as Councilor Aguilar reminded me, we don't need a quorum at the 4 o'clock meeting, but we do have folks who are working elsewhere today, and so we wish them well. With that being said, we'll move forward with staff reports. Jim David, Legislative Operations Manager, come talk to us about all the interesting things you did on your National League of Cities adventure.
We're going to start off here with Dave, and then we'll go with myself, and then Councilor Karski.
Good, thank you.
What I want to talk about was the Big Dig project and the impact that it had on the Boston's community as far as the business community and also the neighborhoods. It was conceived in the 1970s, completed in 2007. It was removing an elevated 6-lane interstate from the dividing the Boston's north end from the remainder of the city. It was originally intended to allow 70,000 cars per day, and now it's up to 200,000 plus. And so it needed to be tore down, and then it was replaced with tunnels under the RFK Greenway. And Jim, if you want to go ahead. You can see the photo on the top corner is what it looked like, and then the others are what it is now. And the commercial property values adjacent to the Greenway increased 79% over the 15 years that the project has been completed, and the citywide property increases has been 41%. These parks are these park settings are places for people to communicate or to congregate and have festivals and celebrations. The Innovation District was impacted by the Big Dig project by repurposing old harbor warehouses into specialized facilities for entrepreneurial startups. The Boston community's medical industry is very prevalent, and with a well-educated labor pool, centrally located, and easy access to mass transit systems, business found that all these advantages were they used to leverage into their business. The other part of the project is the neighborhoods. The Castle Square Apartments is a prime example. It was a 1960s era apartment complex. It used to have bars on the windows, and it was a high crime area. Now it's been retrofitted to improve energy efficiencies. The Big Dig project results have resulted in revitalized downtown businesses, continued revitalizing neighborhoods and buildings, and downtown Boston is now a destination for business, shopping, and entertainment.
Well, not used to pushing these up at all. So the city of Boston has actually taken urban agriculture to a whole new level. You'll see here that they actually created a new department or new agency within city government called the Food Initiative, or the Office of Food Initiative, or OFI. You'll see there that they have 4 directives, but the mission can probably be summed up in that they are trying to support a strong local urban agriculture and food economy in the city of Boston. While attending the National League of Cities, the OFI led many of us on a tour that showcased some of the successes in urban agriculture in the city of Boston. Not many of us often think of agriculture in Boston in the same sentence, but they did have quite a bit of success, and it began with a company called City Fresh Foods, and this is an entity that prepares and delivers food that's taken from locally grown vegetables grass-fed beef and other food options to daycare, schools, and Meals on Wheels, and many others. It delivers close to 8,000 meals daily throughout Massachusetts. On the other side of the spectrum is City Growers. This is the producers within the inner parts of Boston. And it's transforming vacant lots that were often places for crime and other similar activities into urban farms. And their goal is to create a checkerboard of productive green spaces in the inner city of Boston. Their goals also include greater access for local foods and creating what they call green collar jobs for the inner city. Bring together both the producer and the customer is an entity called the Organic Renaissance Food Exchange, or known as FODEX. This is an online platform that connects both the producers and the customers in an online platform for transactions and just matching them up. They compared it to like an online dating site for food producers and their customers. This has been a successful plan, and I just read some recent news reports that they continue to grow to this very day. On the other end, our tour actually ended at an entity called the Crop Circle Kitchen, and many of us have heard of those business incubators. Well, this is actually a culinary business incubator, and this is a 501c3 nonprofit corporation and supports up to 25 culinary entrepreneurs and their businesses through technical support and business mentoring. The entrepreneurs also have the opportunity to use over 3,000 square foot of cooking space, conventional and convection ovens, specialty processing equipment, and 300 feet of cold storage. And then finally, I'd like to end with food trucks. This seems to be a growing business both here locally and especially in the city of Boston. In fact, within the OFI, they have hired a food truck coordinator whose emphasis is to create some incentives and also to make sure that the permitting process for these food trucks is streamlined. There's 20 public locations throughout downtown Boston designated for these food trucks, and in fact they have something called a food truck challenge, which encourages the public interest in the mobile food vending business. And 3 winners are chosen, and they are able to park their vehicle at the City Hall Plaza there in downtown Boston for up to a year. The city also provides a website that promotes the food trucks and where they're going to be, and that's the next one there. You'll see if you want to find your favorite food truck, there's the website where you can find where they're located. So.
In my part of the presentation here, just kind of a little background. We left on November 27th, came back on December 1st, and for I think all of us, our first experience in Boston, a city that has about 750,000 people and about half the footprint of the size of Sioux Falls. So when you talk about urban ag and some of the challenges that come with that, it was very interesting. The other thing that Boston or the general area there has is they have 29 or 30 colleges and universities, MIT, Boston College, Babson, a pretty extensive list, and about 180,000 college students in the area. So they have a lot of capital or intellectual capital there that the city is working on capitalizing on or taking advantage of. Boston had been a declining population for some time, but some things that we learned that we could probably apply to Sioux Falls. They started what's called Mass Challenge. The city has taken a small role in that and allowing it to happen. They're trying to take all the entrepreneurs out of their garages and bring them to one very nice building and have a challenge for their product or their idea that they're trying to get off the ground, and they're putting them all together, all these entrepreneurs together, and they have a $1 million prize for whoever gets voted for having the best product or idea so that they can make it work and then bring more business and that type of thing into the Boston area. They just built right next door to this place a rather large building that'll be housing a pharmaceutical company that'll be employing several thousand people from the whole Mass Challenge program. So the city has taken an active role in working with the resources that they have in the Mass Challenge. It's an accelerator program, kind of like we have that Rich Nazer works at, that the City of Sioux Falls helps contribute to keep that running. Then if we can move on to the Fraunhofer Center for Sustainable Energy Systems. Fraunhofer is a German company, basically, that has worked to develop basically a laboratory. They took a building that was built 100 years ago and made it into a working laboratory where contractors and government entities could come in. They've taken R70 insulation that typically would be about 18 to 20 inches thick, and we're able to make R70 insulation into about a 1-inch size from here to here. So interesting stuff. Again, the city's involvement in it. This is right across the street from Gillette, the manufacturer of the men's shaving cream and razors and that type of thing. So it's an older part. They're retooling older buildings, abandoned buildings actually, and showing how you can take these buildings and make them into, well, kind of like Carnegie, valuable pieces of property within the city without having to tear them down, and keeping that history that goes with them. The one building we were in had oak timbers that had to be 3 feet across. And when you think about a building built in the way my mind works in the early 1900s, those oak trees were probably there at the beginning of the Civil War or the Revolutionary War. So kind of an interesting aside on that, I guess. Some interesting things. We also spent a lot of time in different seminars. As an example, the Urban Ag, I went to one on preventing gang violence and building communities where young people thrive. Just for some information, I guess what I gained out of several of these things was we're way ahead of where a lot of other cities and communities are. We're very fortunate here in Sioux Falls, both on some of these things, but it's always good to have an awareness. I spent a lot of time, or a fair amount of time, in their vendor area and picked up a few interesting things there. Get to my stuff. They have one company that has an application for your smartphone. It's called C-Click Fix, where the city could use this, and people could, with the use of their their smartphone, take a photo of a pothole and report it, or just through a web app on their phone. So it's kind of an interesting, neat thing that I don't know who to hand it off to, but it may be our IT department, but that could be something that they could look into. Another one was Call to Recycle. It's a battery recycling, any rechargeable battery, primarily cell phones. Free service. They give you a box. You can put it in your police department, your fire department, your libraries, Carnegie, wherever, and people can drop their rechargeable batteries off. We got to keep these things out of our landfills. And when the box is full, it comes with a mailing label. It's mailed in free, and they mail you another box back. It costs absolutely nothing. Kind of a neat thing. So again, another thing that I will pass on to Bob Capel. Maybe it's something they can institute. I don't know what kind of program we have for batteries or where people have to take them, but costs absolutely nothing, and this pretty easy to use from what I can see. If anybody has any questions of any of the three of us.
Great,
I guess one thing I would like to add, it was Sioux Falls is new, or maybe rejoined the National League of Cities. We had been absent from it for some time. So it was a new first-time experience for most of us, or for all of us, I guess. One thing we didn't do that we could have done, they have a lot of leadership classes that especially our staff could have benefited from, and there is a cost to doing those. We didn't do them just because we didn't know what we were getting into for the most part. But I would encourage going again, counselors to go, and at least a couple of the staff to go, and to continue the membership in the National League of Cities, and we can benefit from what goes on there.
Good, good. That's great. Thank you, Councilor Karski. That's one of the things that was the philosophy behind rejoining or joining the National League of Cities, is that networking and education are always good things. So thank all three of you for sharing the Big Dig. I didn't realize it had that much connection to Sioux Falls. Think about all those things that are similar to Sioux Falls. Questions for the three from their presentation? All right. I expect conversations to come out of this in the future as well, as we all kind of process this and think about how Sioux Falls fits into not only the National League of Cities, but our region and area. So thank you again. Moving on in our agenda, Public Services Committee report from the meeting of Tuesday, January 8th. Councilor Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. Last week's Public Services Committee meeting, first item on the agenda was Project Trim. Don Kearney, Director of Park and Recreations, provided an update on Project Trim, covering points of placing maintenance responsibility on street trees on abutting property owners, which is allowed by state law. They also stated that the current program has a 97% compliance rate, and that the staff is not recommending having the city or a contractor perform trimming due to budget concerns. After a discussion, we have decided to continue the discussion of Project Trim. One of the requests was to take a look at the letter that is issued out first time to offending properties, and maybe adjust that letter so that the understanding of where the offending trees are on the abutting lot could be located easier. Basically, on that one, we are going to continue that discussion. The second item on the agenda was the taxi cab ordinance. This is something we haven't looked at for a few years, and after getting some public testimony and a presentation by our legislative operation manager, Jim David, I think it was found that there are some holes in our ordinance that need to be addressed. And with that, that will continue along Public Services Committee discussion. We also are working with staff to provide some insight on changes that need to happen in this ordinance. So I feel that this will be something that could take a couple more meetings before we bring that to the council.
Good, thank you. Questions for Councilor Anderson? Councilor Jamieson.
Councilor Anderson, I didn't get a chance to watch those meetings. I intend to, but just one real quick question. I know we had talked a little bit about when a street is widened, say an arterial road is widened, and that boulevard becomes smaller or maybe even disappears. Was there any talk about managing, trimming those trees on a newly constructed road like that? Did you guys cover that?
There was a brief discussion. Still, the administration, the staff is not for them cutting down trees at the very least. They would rather leave that to the property owners. And their discussion on it was basically that, you know, as a property owner, you may have some ties to that tree that where you may want to have it done yourself so that you know it's done properly. And once again, that's still something that needs to be continually discussed. But I know as the Marion Road project, they have a lot of discussions with the neighborhood out there, and I think are getting better ideas on how to process those type of changes in the future.
Okay, well, just a thought is that this is going to be an ongoing challenge, I think, for a long time as all of our roads, arterial roads, get a little wider and more roads become arterial roads, that we should probably have an answer or figure this out. I mean, the fact that you would have a 16-foot clearance on an arterial road, I think it is, and if it was it was obstructing it because it didn't reach out to the road, and now all of a sudden they moved the street over, and they need to have that tree significantly trimmed. And just whoever happens to be the property owner at that time is now burdened with trimming that tree to compliance. Just seems like a little much, that's all. My take, but I just bring it up. I know you guys discussed a lot of things, and I haven't watched it all, but I would just further that as an element of concern for myself.
And respectfully, we did cover a lot of different issues with Project Trim, and I think that it still needs the discussion due to the fact that even our committee was split on this in some ways. So I think that discussion does need to continue so we can try to find those ways that we can come together on this.
Councilor Anderson, could I add something as a member of the committee?
Please.
That is something we didn't talk about in this last meeting, Councilor Jameson, but we talked about it just briefly in the meeting before. And I don't recall us coming to any sort of resolution on that issue, because we did talk about the Marion Road project and how concerning that was. That we did talk about that idea that staff needs to coordinate better. But to me, that's different than Project Trim. To me, that has to do with Public Works and how they're doing those streets, and then coordinating with the Forestry Department in terms of, because in that project, if I recall, Forestry put out notices to the people who were on that street during the construction of the street. Is that, in a nutshell, is that what happened?
That is correct. They actually had Project Trim in that district.
Right, even though the people didn't have a street at the time.
They actually went in and did the survey and then sent out the messages before the construction was even completed. So there was a lot of misunderstanding, miscommunication that was happening out there. Residents were not very happy due to the fact that they had put up with a year of construction, and then before it gets done, they're being told that their trees are, offending a city ordinance, and a lot of their trees got pulled in this project too. So I think there needs to be more coordination between those departments so that we don't have those type of things happening.
Right. I just didn't want you to be looking for that conversation in just this most recent meeting, because we didn't talk about it this last week.
No, we have discussed it, though.
It is something we need to follow up on, though, as council members. Any other questions for Councilor Anderson? Thank you for the report. Council open discussion. Anything? Councilor Jameson, go ahead. A couple things. Go ahead.
2 items, if I could. The next National League of Cities meetings, when is that? I thought I saw an email come just recently.
The national meeting is in the fall always, correct? But then there are some, that's the thing that Councilor Anderson and Councilor Aguilar and I did was a sort of a mini workshop on a particular topic.
And if I can, Councilman Jameson, the one that you and I went to was a national. That was a National League of Cities that we went to. Didn't you go to that one too? Yeah.
Yeah, you did several years ago.
That was a while ago.
It was when you were fairly new council members, if
correct.
Memory serves.
And I thought, one thing I will say, I firmly support the city staying in the National League of Cities. I'm very happy that other councilors have decided to experience the meetings, the networking that you can do, learning what other cities are doing, learning what we're doing. The one that Councilor Erfenbach and Aguilar and I went to, I think we found that in our meetings with other cities, they were thinking about doing things that we already were doing. And it was really interesting bringing those points out and then having those city officials come to us and ask us questions or give us their business cards so that our staff could contact them and maybe give them information on how to, do code enforcement or, one of the many different things the city has to provide for its citizens. I think it's a great opportunity for networking.
That's exactly right. And I just to put it in your planning, it is always that, or sometime late in November, and that I've encouraged staff to plan to attend as many as they possibly can, and then we'll just kind of take turns as staff or as council members. But for those exact reasons, that networking and education are huge in doing our jobs better. So think about that for this fall. Other items for open discussion. You had another one.
Yeah, one other question maybe for the city attorney, actually. Given the low number of counselors who will be at the meeting tonight, are there any vote? I don't have the agenda in front of me, but are there any issues that are going to require all of us be on the same page? No ordinances?
We don't have any ordinances,
Okay.
Counselor, so it's all just some resolutions, and it's just the majority vote according to those present.
Very good. That's what thank you.
Other items for open discussion. I do have one. It's also related to tonight's agenda. Item 21 postpones our February 12th meeting to February 13th. You'll recall that we talked last week during this meeting about the idea of let's see if we can't just cancel it because we know we're not going to have a quorum that night. We're not allowed to cancel it by law, and so we will meet, but we will meet the next day. So that is just a resolution changing. We're just physically moving the 4 o'clock, the committee meeting and the 7 o'clock meeting to the next day from that Tuesday night. And that is, again, the day that many of us will be at the Sioux Falls Day at the legislature. So that's what that one is, item 21. Any other open discussion items? Oh, yes, and the city clerk has reminded me, too, to announce, and I will announce it later as well, the Land Use Committee meeting that is normally scheduled after this meeting, this particular Monday, has been canceled. It doesn't have a quorum, and so it has been rescheduled to this same Monday in February, correct? Thank you. All right, let's move on to our presentations. We have the ADA Transition Plan update from Colleen Moran, Assistant City Attorney. Welcome, Colleen.
I am Colleen Moran, one of the assistant city attorneys as well as the ADA coordinator for the city. And thank you for allowing me to be here and being able to provide you with an update on the ADA transition plan. As you know, the American with Disabilities Act requires that the city its programs, services, facilities, and policies be accessible to all. And periodically, we are required then to review how we're doing, what we're doing well in areas in which we might need a little more work. And to meet that end, we have been working very closely with Dr. Peter Blank and with Jim Felikos. They have been doing the review for us. Both of them are here today, and Mr. Felikos is the one that's going to present you with the information. Just so you know, he is a disability advocate and he is an attorney. He has his own practice in New York City. And so I would invite him at this time then to provide you with the update.
Good. Thank you, Colleen. Welcome, Mr. Felikos. Good to have you here.
Thank you, council members, members of the public, for this opportunity to update you. Is this on or not?
We don't know. We're just having that conversation about whether the mic works.
Is there a red light on?
Thank you, Lori, for helping us with this.
There we go. I think you just might,
Closer.
we just might have to move it a little closer.
Okay.
There,
Okay.
that's better.
Thank you.
Pardon me. Thank you, council members and members of the public, for this opportunity to update you on our review of issues related to Sioux Falls, its citizens with disabilities, visitors, employees, and so on. The mayor commissioned us to review thoroughly all manner throughout the government, all aspects of the city's policies as they relate to disability. We've been working throughout the past year to helpfully inform the city of new regulations and how those will change issues at the same time as we look at how the city is doing in each of these various areas. We've worked with many people. We've been, I believe, on 6 visits so far. We've had a lot of meetings with many helpful people, and it's been a great pleasure to work with them. Especially want to thank Dave Fifley and Colleen for all their work. The people in transportation at SAM and the engineering department have really gone out of their way to do some very thorough reviews in looking at the city's bus stops. Eventually, we came to observe that too many, it appeared to me, of the city's bus stops were inaccessible, and we weren't sure how many there were. And within 2 weeks, they had gone out and done a review of kind of all the conditions, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. The engineering department have been looking in a more thorough way. They've been previously slowly expanding the deployment of curb ramps, and they were very responsive in my questioning, trying to find out how many curb ramps need to be deployed at this stage and what it would take. And I'll tell you more about that in a minute. We've been particularly impressed with the city's parks department and how over the years it's very methodically deployed improvements at the parks, which have improved access at many of them, and overall presents a really stellar model of disability access in a very integrated fashion. And it's involved many members of the public in inputting to that. The ADA review boards that there are have been very active, and getting public input is one of the important factors in finding where problems are, keeping helping the citizens with disabilities and others to address those issues. The police department and others have worked to change police response tactics in dealing with people who are in emotional crisis in a manner that brings in the healthcare field and other disciplines, and this is really a new best practice kind of nationwide. It's the sort of thing that hopefully can save lives in the end, and they're implementing that. Seems like city staff have, in the police department and elsewhere, really helped obtain a change in state law to allow them to do that, and that is something that is quite impressive to see. On other areas, we've completed our review mostly on those subjects. We're still working on a few other areas. We just started a review on libraries, and we just started a review on the public health clinics. We're much further along on the review on the police policies, fire department, HR, the administration generally, and a few other areas I'm missing off the top of my head. My apologies there. The major complaints and problems we've found are in sidewalks and transit. Despite the work they've been doing over the years to improve accessibility across, there do remain problems. It became apparent that, as I said, a lot of the bus stops were inaccessible, and there really need to be improvements on a quarter of them to make them qualify as accessible. Put another way, 1/4 of the city's bus stops are technically inaccessible, and that's a large number. The city has been deploying curb ramps over the years. There was an early Department of Justice regulation that required cities to deploy curb ramps at all intersections by 1995. No cities really in compliance, but that was the regulation gave cities 3 years to deploy curb ramps. This is 20 years later, and there remain hundreds of curb ramps that are needed. Many curb ramps have been installed kind of over time as streets have been repaved, and the curb ramps were deployed as part of the higher requirements that are involved. But the city has been deploying other curb ramps at a kind of slower rate, and they've been making progress maybe faster than many other cities, but making progress slower than technically advisable. And those two issues are related: the lack of bus stops and inaccessible curb ramps. And we've encouraged the departments to try to work together to figure out ways to resolve them, to figure out what it would take to resolve them. And in our view, the costs in making those capital adjustments might not be all that significant. The bus pads, deployment of the bus pads, I just learned today, looks like it'll cost about $40,000. That in just with kind of current budget, that the people at SAM think they could do that within 2 to 3 years. The curb ramps is a larger number, but under one plan could do that over 5 years with kind of no changes. And again, I think on a kind of cost efficiency, you spend $3 million a year on paratransit, and anything you can do to allow people to move from the paratransit system to the fixed route system will save money. And I don't have at this time a way. We're actually looking at a way to try to measure that. I don't know that it's really necessary, but to figure out how much money you would save by deploying new curb ramps and bus pads faster, you'll save money on the paratransit side. People are riding paratransit for other reasons than only inaccessible bus stops and curb ramps. But I think the case for the city putting the money up front and trying to do that as quickly as you can is quite strong. The final other major common complaint concerns just general maintenance on the sidewalks and snow removal. The city has delegated those responsibilities to landholders, to private businesses or private homeowners. Under federal law, it is nevertheless the city's responsibility. The city can't delegate away its authority. So the city needs to enforce those requirements. The city has made some changes in its policies, and there's been no snow to test whether those changes in policies have been effective or not. The city's been reminding the public about its responsibilities to plow the snow, or have come up with other arrangements to have people plow the snow, and we'll find out whether those work well or not. But in the end, it is the city's responsibility to ensure those are done. And as I've been around the city, some of the maintenance problems, I've noticed in the sidewalks where there's cracks and things like that, and the city needs to improve, I think, its surveillance system that is able to find where those are, where there are curb ramps, for example, there's a gap that runs around the edge, and the weather conditions have caused those to separate out, and that's a real risk. And we've actually been advising the city departments to look at the types of technology that Councilor Karski was talking about before, so that people can take a picture. Here's the crack in the sidewalk that I tripped over today, and the products are not very expensive. They will present the relevant city departments with a geotagged location, show literally where the problem is, and here's a picture of it, and here's what needs to be addressed. And the final piece is, I understand that there's a delay in the kind of due process that occurs when the city departments discover and want to cite people for failure to maintain sidewalks, and that takes a long time to address, and anything you can do to resolve that more quickly. As was mentioned, I worked at the ACLU, so I'm all for due process, but it is the city's responsibility to fix it. And if the city is concerned about the free rider problem of people not fixing things, you could come up with a different system. But in the absence of that, I don't think the city is well served to leave some segment of sidewalk as inaccessible for months while that process is picking along. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Councilor Jameson.
Maybe more of a comment if I could. I remember back as a kid, maybe not that young of a kid, but my father participated in an experiment on the transit system, disabilities experiment, where they had a group of the commissioners. Councilor Anderson's dad was involved, I believe, as well. And one of them had a blindfold on and tried to maneuver through the city and other things. One was in a wheelchair. I'm not sure what the others were, but it might be a good experiment to have again with a new group of people. If you guys, if the individuals involved in this study and the mayor would be a great candidate to be a participant in that, to really go through this exercise of what others have to go through and understand the challenges better. I just remembered it, and when I was sitting here listening, I thought, that'd be a good experiment to do again if it's so well received.
Mm-hmm. Valid point. Thoughts, comments, questions? Councilor Anderson.
I actually have the Argus Leader photo of my father in a wheelchair being taken up in the lift. So it's something I talked about 3 years ago to previous council. And I think it's something that we should look at hard, because it really allows you to experience the challenges of a person with disabilities. And I'm a former paratransit driver, so I've worked a lot, in the transit side of it, the sidewalks, the curb cutouts, also the experience, as you were talking about, trying to allow people to move off of the paratransit and utilize the transit facility. But what we're seeing here in Sioux Falls is that a lot of people are moving to this city specifically because of our paratransit and the ability to be able to get to hospital appointments, doctor appointments, and things like that. So it's become a very difficult situation in trying to move people off the paratransit and onto the transit. And I think as we look at the regulations almost yearly, I get the emails from our planning department and the discussions that are happening there. It's a big challenge, especially legally. So I guess that's something that, if you have any suggestions on how we can do that even better, I would love to hear it.
Well, if people, it depends, on the reason the person's qualified to use the paratransit. If people were moving here in order to gain access to paratransit so they could get from wherever they were staying to your hospitals, you have, one of the great things about this town is an excellent hospital system. And on the other side of the coin from their use of the paratransit system is their use of the hospital system. And looked at kind of in the whole, they might be bringing a lot of money in on insurance reimbursement and Medicare, and the $3 million a year in total paratransit expenditure. That does not, I understand that paratransit's expensive, and it's expensive on a per user basis, but I think that population is a net plus for the city. People coming here to access your excellent hospital system.
And if I may, I don't disagree with you in any way, shape, or form in that, but it's the process of taking a look at the load that the paratransit has taken. When we started the paratransit unit here, I was the second driver they hired. So I've helped train drivers, I help write the manuals and everything, and it's a department that I really keep a close eye on. And I still know a lot of people down there. It's the caring of the people down there in the transit and paratransit facility of those people that they are transporting. And I think that has been one of the reasons why our paratransit facility especially, or department, has grown so quickly and to a point of where we're trying to just meet that need. And then especially in the wintertime when that season changes and a lot more people become eligible for that system. So it's something that, you know, we struggle with, I would say, almost daily, and that we're always trying to improve on. And I want to say that's something, if in defense of our transit department, we are always looking at ways to, you know, be able to keep that great service that we provide, but still make sure that, you know, the rates can stay reasonable and, you know, that we're still providing a good service for everyone.
Thank you. Other questions from council? Yeah,
I have some questions now, and I don't know if this will be for you, sir, or for Mike Cooper. The curb ramps, where are we at as far as a city? What percentage of our curbs still need to be repaired? If I can ask, you know, I don't know if you have a general number or maybe an off-the-head estimate of, you know, the percentage of curbs that need to be repaired and maybe what that cost could be.
Numbers for you, follow up.
Okay, because I'm hearing 40,000 for bus pads, and I know every year we're out there with private contractors replacing those curb cutouts. So I guess that would be a good idea to see where we're at on that. We may be able to take a look at that in the CIP. If it's not a great dollar amount, it might be something that we can jump on and get taken care of. And you're saying a 5-year plan for those. These bus stops, what do we have for any type of plan to correct the problems that we're having with these bus stops?
Thank you.
I'll take the first stab at that. Mike Cooper, Planning and Building Services. I just got a briefing today as far as where we're at with this ADA transition plan update and as far as how it's impacting transit, because that is a big part of the whole process. As I understand it, we have identified just over 80 bus stop locations that are not in compliance, and most of those deal with adding a concrete pad from the sidewalk to the bus stop. I believe that historically when many of those were installed, that was not an issue that we considered. It was more just making them accessible to the curb when the bus pulls up. So that's where the $40,000 cost estimate is coming from, to add those concrete pads. And right now we're looking at probably a 2-year time frame. If we could speed that up, I think that's something that we would certainly investigate, because in the terms of overall city budgets, that's not a large dollar amount, but it is an amount that we do want to transition over the next year or two as far as our implementation of those fixes. So I guess when in trying to avoid the headline today that 1/4 of all city bus stops are non-compliant, this is something that we've been aware of for some time, and we have been trying to gradually retrofit those. But getting the experts here to really analyze where those are located and what the fix should be is really something that will help us put together a better strategy for the next year or two as far as implementation.
Great.
So
Go
did
ahead.
I say anything that you would not say? No. Okay, all right.
Okay, good. Thank you.
One last
Councilor,
question.
Go ahead. Yes.
So, Mike, I guess looking at it, I remember a few years ago when our former city clerk was here, we worked on a location on 6 in Cleveland that had it just had the bench there. It was sat down in the grass.
Yes.
And people were actually sitting on the grass waiting for bus. Now, we had that repaired. We put a pad in. Now, that should be compliant. Would that be a great example of a bus stop that's compliant?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And if I could just add to one of our other initiatives that we're going to be moving forward with is replacing the bus stop signs. What we've done in the past is we've used kind of the traffic or the street sign, the traffic engineering sign template. And what we're coming up with is a new design that's bigger, more user-friendly to really help identify where those bus stops and those bus routes are. So that's another change that you'll see start to happen in the near future.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good, thank you. Hang on. Councilor Jamison, was your question for Mike?
I was just going to maybe make a comment. I think this is an update, if I understand it right. Later you'll come back with recommendations and summaries of all the, looking at policies and all the buildings and everything.
That's right.
Okay. I think we're all interested in trying to fix these as best we can. Certainly we'll be interested in those summaries.
Yeah, I mean,
Good.
so as I say, I mean, at the moment, we're seeing mostly positive things, and we're seeing positive response. But, you know, this is the kind of big one at the moment, and hoping to, you know, for these very reasons to, you know, help you to address them as soon as possible, and hopefully resolve these.
Great, thank you. Other questions from council? I do have one. I know we're talking update, but I'm trying to wrap my head around about what you're doing. So would you describe, if this were your study for today, this building, what would you look at and how would you go about it to figure out what's right, what's wrong in a building or at a bus stop or whatever? What's your process?
Well, it's twofold. One, there've already we have not been brought on to do a complete measurement of everything. Those have already been done. I'm generally assured and would generally expect that when you know, prior recommendations were made and they came in and they did retrofits, you know, you can kind of look and see how those were done. We've also been looking at other complaints, but I'm coming in and I'm looking at this point, knowing the building is old, knowing the building has been renovated, I can come in and look and see various features. I'm looking at the size, I'm looking at the spacings on in the seats, I'm looking at the communications capabilities you have here in the city, whether or not they're going to have an accessible alternative. I don't know that you know how these systems are going to play out in here. I understand from other research and other work with the city that this will be broadcast on your television network, and I'm told and I've seen that those are captioned and you have a contract, and I have been, you know, looking through all your contracts to make sure that those things are happening. One of the things that we've been looking at now and are not sure how the city is addressing it, and if it is adequately, is information that then has been broadcast on TV, new statutory, new law and regulations say that if that information is then rebroadcast on the internet, and if you put that on your website as, you know, as a link so people can look at the video later on, that captioned information still has to contain captions. And I don't think that's happening right now on your internet site, and so we're going to work with them and try to fix that. Does that somewhat answer your question?
Yeah.
You know, but we're looking at the kind of process side more so. You've done a lot of work on the architectural side, and we're trying to make sure those happen. Things have changed in architecture, so your architects on your new events center, There was a case a number of years ago where the architects failed in their advice on the building, on certifying a building as complying with the ADA, and the architects lost a malpractice suit in that. So architects are a lot more careful these days, and you know, it's a little easier to rely on kind of all the details as a result. But we did work with them, for example, and I didn't think that the vertical and horizontal integration, where, you know, how many different places there were for people with mobility disabilities to sit in the new event center, and they made adjustments for that. But we've also been, you know, getting input from lots of people in the public, and continue to want to hear that to help inform, you know, how these processes working well? Can they work better? You know, are you merely complying? You know, we're going to make sure that happens, but we want to help the city to do more than merely comply, to make it a more livable city and a more attractive city.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions? Colleen, question for you: if the public has input they'd like to make on this on the ADA transition plan, can they go on siouxfalls.org and make comments? Is there a place to do that at this point, or will there be, or some other option?
We have had a number of meetings where we've invited the public to come and speak, and at that time we've taken input, and I always encourage everyone to contact me just at my office, which is 367-8745, or cmoran@siouxfalls.org. And I'm certainly, and we just got a Facebook page actually with Human Relations as well, and they can make comments there, and I would welcome any of those comments, and we do pass those on. I keep track of any comments that are made and share those with Peter and Jim.
Great. That's what we need.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here. Thanks for your work. We appreciate hearing that we're doing lots of things well, and we look forward to doing most everything better. So, thank you. All right, moving on in our agenda this evening, we do have an executive session scheduled. We will not adjourn, but sort of recess for a couple of minutes to clear the room, and we will do our executive session, and then, and we will adjourn then after the executive session. I apologize. Councilor Jameson has a comment before we go to that.
All this talk of transit reminded me that Mike Cooper might validate this, but late last year, and Councilor Aguilar I think is aware of this too, late last year the transit system did surpass the 1 million ridership level. I don't know if everybody was aware of that. Certainly quite a milestone for the city. I was my arm was being twisted to make sure that I brought that up today, and I nearly forgot, but all this talk of transit reminded me. Mike, am I right on that number? Any comments that you wanted to add?
Yeah, again, in the past, we have exceeded the total ridership of 1 million, but last year, it was over 1 million riders just on the fixed route system itself. So that was a big jump from any previous year.
But we don't. Okay, just trying to get my ducks in a row. Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Appreciate the update. Anything else, Councilor Jameson? So I'm reminded by the city attorney that I do need a motion to go into executive session.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I would move that we go into executive session regarding personnel matters pursuant to SDCL 1-25-21.
I'd second that.
Great, thank you. And all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Thank you. As I was going to say earlier, we will come back into session and adjourn after that. So thank you all.